Shalom. Welcome to Tov, the Jewish New Channel. My name is Avital, and we have with us today Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. He's the director of Israel 365 Action and the co-host of Shoulder to Shoulder, a podcast, which he broadcasts together with a pastor, a Christian pastor. And that is basically the subject of our talk today. We're seeing for many years now a lot of support from evangelicals in the United States, in South America, in Europe, in a lot of places in Africa. It's almost a rock of support for Israel all over the world. And a lot of Israelis and a lot of Jews are a little suspicious. They're not really sure what the evangelicals want from us if they are secret missionaries. So that's my question to you. Why do the evangelicals support us? And is it sincere? Do they accept us as Jews the way we are? Or are they secretly trying to convert us to Christianity?
Well, that binary presents a very simple view of the landscape of the Christian world vis-a-vis Israel. It's actually very complex. And when we talk about the evangelicals, Jews have to understand that there isn't one denomination of evangelical Christian. Evangelical is a catch-all term for a whole slew of denominations of Christianity. And they're not all pro-Israel, and they're not all pro-Israel for the same reasons. And it's far beyond the scope of a short discussion to get into all the weeds of that. But let me I'll illustrate it with a story that happened a number of months ago before the war. It's hard to remember anything that's before the war, but a number of months ago, back in the late spring and the early summer, you might recall that there was an event where there was a prayer event at the southern wall of the Kotel. And there was a protest of Jews against it and calling them out for being missionaries, and it led to some violence. Now, that event, the reason I'm bringing up that event is that someone who doesn't know what's going on in the evangelical world would think that there you have it. You see, these evangelicals were praying for Jews to accept Jesus. They were expressing missionary motives. But what outsiders to this Jewish-Christian relationship don't see is that some of the key Christian organizations that are supportive of Israel, the key Christian Zionist organizations, refuse to participate in that event. And what you actually have in the Christian world in terms of Israel is a divide. So, for example, an organization like Christians United for Israel, led by Pastor John Hagee, has been criticized by other Christians over the years for not missionizing, for not evangelizing Jews, because they take it as their position that they are opposed to doing that their motive in the relationship has nothing to do with converting Jews to Christianity. And of course, other Christians who say, what are you doing? How can you forsake what's called the Great Commission, the commission to convert everyone to belief in Christianity? So you actually have a divide in the evangelical world over whether or not it's a priority to try to convert Jews. So this subtlety of the relationship is really not understood by most Jews. They kind of paint all evangelicals with one brush. That said, to answer your question, why do evangelicals support Israel? So there's a belief that a lot of Jews have that the reason evangelicals support Israel is because of some end times eschatological prophecy in the New Testament about bringing all the Jews to Israel, and only then can there be a rapture. Now, what's interesting about that, I've been involved in the Jewish-Christian relationship for full-time for about 8 years. I have a lot of very good friends who are leading Christian theologians, college professors, pastors, leaders in their world. And I've had many private conversations with them and been involved in many public events. And one of the interesting things about the Christian Zionist world is that I never, ever hear that motive expressed for being involved in, for supporting Israel, except from Jews who are suspicious that that's the motive that Christians have for supporting Israel. And I say this, I emphasize that I've been involved in many events and private conversations, to make the point that it's not like they really have this as their motive, but when I'm in the room, they're concealing it. I'm talking about, I've been in rooms where there's 1,000 Christians in the room. It's a big Christian Zionist symposium, all different speakers giving prayers. And I happen to be, in the background, maybe coming up at the end to say something. No one really knows I'm there. I'm just, to a certain extent, I have to just tell people, look, I've been involved in this space a long time. I know these people. I know how they think. So why do they support Israel? It's actually quite simple. Throughout the history of the church, since the beginning of Christianity almost, in a couple centuries after the beginning of Christianity, there was a belief that was the mainstream theology of Christians that all the promises made to the Jewish people were transferred to the followers of Jesus, were transferred to the church. And it's called
replacement theology.
Replacement theology. That's what, and a lot of Jews don't realize that replacement theology is actually not in the New Testament. It's something that Christian thinkers came up with a couple centuries later. And the reason that's important is that evangelical Christians, one thing all evangelical Christians share, evangelical Protestants is what I mean. When we use the term evangelical, we usually mean Protestants.
Right.
So in the Protestant world, the post-Puritan Protestant world, which is what most, especially American evangelicals and American denominations, even that have spread elsewhere, like Methodism and Pentecostalism, which are the main basis of Christian support for Israel, they really follow the concept of what's called sola scriptorum in Latin, which means that they, after the Reformation, after the break from Catholicism, they look at what the text of the Bible says, and they don't necessarily accept the doctrines that have been inherited by the church fathers. So, for example, in Judaism,
they're Christian Karaites, kind of.
Right, to a certain extent, exactly, right. Without a lot of the baggage that Karaites mean.
Right, of course.
But basically, they look at the text. So it's very important to note that replacement theology is not in the text of the Bible, and therefore the fact that Augustine and Justin Martyr and other church fathers put forward this idea, and it was accepted for thousands of years. In an Orthodox Jewish context, we would call that Masorah, that there's a halacha, the Rambam said it, and then we accept it as our rule to this day, but they look at the text itself. So what happened was that when the state of Israel was declared, but even before that, when the Zionist movement started, Christian Zionism was part of the Zionist movement, I should add, from the very beginning. Interesting trivia point. One of the earliest Jewish communities in modern Israel that was built for the impoverished Jewish community in Jerusalem is Batei Machse, those buildings in the old city of Jerusalem that are known as like the old neighborhood in the Jewish quarter. Batei Machse was built with money that was raised from Christians, from Methodist Christians in Australia, for the purpose of building housing for Jews in Jerusalem. I'm pointing this out just to say that Christian support for the return of the Jewish people to the land has been since the beginning. And it's very simple. When they look at the return of the Jewish people after thousands of years to our land, and they look at the Bible, they say, wait a second. The promises of the return of the people of Israel to the land of Israel after a long exile, being scattered to the four corners of the earth, and especially in the last few decades where Israel has become an economic success story, they look at Deuteronomy chapter 30, Dvarim Perek Lamed, which says that even if you are scattered to the ends of the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you back. He will bring you back to the land of your fathers, and you will take possession of it, and you will become more numerous and more prosperous than your fathers. They look at those verses and they say, wow, those have been fulfilled. The Jewish people have come back, they've taken possession of the land, and they are now more numerous and more prosperous in the land than ever before. And therefore, the idea behind replacement theology, that the promises made to Israel in the Bible no longer apply, must be false. So you have this huge community of millions of Christians worldwide who reject replacement theology at this point. Now, does that mean that they're not?
They also adopt the verse in Genesis that God says to Abraham, and through you I will bless the families of the earth.
Right, and that's the basis for certain passages in the New Testament that speak about connecting to the Jewish people. Salvation is of the Jews, that the Christians must continue to respect the Jews, even though the Jews reject Jesus. There's all kinds of interesting passages. We could get into the weeds of Christian theology about the Jews. Suffice it to say that at this point, there is a war going on internally in the Christian world over replacement theology. There are the holdouts who are holding fast to the idea that the Jewish people are rejected by God. And if you believe that way, then the state of Israel is illegitimate theologically. It shouldn't exist. But if you reject replacement theology, then the state of Israel is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Now, in terms of wanting Jews to accept Jesus, wanting Jews to convert, most Christian Zionists are of the opinion that it's simply not their job to work this out. That's the way they deal with the problem. There are others within the Christian Zionist movement who are missionaries. Those of us on the Jewish side of things in this relationship work very hard to support the relationship with those Christian groups who reject missionizing and reject proselytizing to Jews. And there's a stark divide, which goes back to the anecdote I started with. When you had that prayer event, which was hosted by missionary groups. Those weren't the groups that I work with. They weren't the groups that other Jews in this space work with. But also many of the key Christian organizations involved in Christian Zionism refused to participate in that event because it involved missionaries. So there's an internal dispute going on, not only over replacement theology, but among Christian Zionists over whether or not to proselytize Jews. So what I'm saying to you is the answer is complex. It's a minefield. There are missionaries in the Christian Zionist movement, but the majority of Christian support for Israel is coming from Christians who simply have set that aside and view their support of Israel as supporting what is clearly God's continuing covenant with the Jewish people. That's how they see it for the most part. I'll add one last point. If the Christian Zionist movement has as its goal to convert Jews, then they're the least effective missionaries in history. Because, for example, Pastor John Hagee down in San Antonio, who's the founder of Christians United for Israel, that has millions of members, he's the most prominent Christian Zionist. In the entire history of his activity on behalf of Israel, I cannot think of one single example of a Jew who was converted to Christianity through that work. So if the motive behind his Christian support for Israel is the conversion of Jews, then he's really, really bad at it.
That's a very compelling point. Where do the Messianic Jews? I hesitate to use that term because it's an oxymoron. It's like being a vegetarian for steak. You have to choose sides, right? But the people that call themselves Messianic Jews, who I have encountered over the years, where do they fit into this equation?
That's a very tough question. They actually complicate the relationship to a great extent because for a variety of reasons. Let me just walk you through them briefly. First of all, one should understand that the Jews who call themselves these Jews who believe in Jesus, who are Christians, who call themselves Messianic Jews, I don't like using the term Messianic Judaism. I prefer to call it Judaic Christianity. And the reason I say that is that calling it Messianic Judaism makes it sound like this is a branch of Judaism. Which it is not.
I think we already have Messianic Judaism. I think our Judaism is already Messianic Judaism. Right, don't steal our name.
In terms of, I don't want to give them that ground.
I think it's obviously meant to obfuscate. It's meant to.
They're not all devious, sinister, nefarious actors. Some of them are just wonderful people who were raised in. Almost all Jews who believe in Jesus were raised in non-observant homes. They were raised with a very watered-down, practically atheistic version of Judaism. And then they embraced Jesus somewhere along the way, and they embraced their Jewish identity. A lot of them are wonderful people, and I meet these people all over the place. It's I have to tell you, it's not the most comfortable thing because it does blur the lines. But that's why I always stress that I don't view what's called Messianic Judaism, that's what they call it. I don't call it that because it's not a branch of Judaism. It's a branch of Christianity. These are Jews who've converted to Christianity. Now, the complicated aspect of it is that community is extremely Zionistic. They're extremely pro-Israel.
Right.
And I'll also add, they're a lot bigger in the U.S. than most Jews think.
And they're
Most
bigger
Jews
in
don't
Israel than
realize that
most Jews realize either.
Right. They are a growing community. So where they fit in is complicated. And privately, I know a number of these people, but it's and like I said, some of them I'll meet people and they're wonderful people, but there's a problem in the relationships. Let me just add a point which a lot of Jews might, maybe I'll just give you something to think about, which is that there are a lot of Jews out there, and we know this very well, who are the heart and soul of the atheistic progressive left that is anti-Israel. We know that polling numbers show that younger Jews who are not observant, who come from Reform backgrounds, for instance, tend to be actually anti-Israel nowadays. A lot of the college students screaming from the river to the sea, unfortunately, are progressive Jewish kids.
Yeah, unfortunately, they belong to another branch of Judaism that's known as Tikkun Olam, and they think, though, that the tenets of the Jewish religion are social justice, and they buy into the woke intersectionality.
And they don't believe in God the way we do. They don't believe in the Torah being from God the way we do.
I just want to go back to the Messianics.
This is why I wanted to tie this into the Messianics and just give us some food for thought, which is that Messianics they're not welcome in the Jewish community. We don't consider them Jews.
Right.
But somehow we continue to consider Jews who are working against the state of Israel, against the Jewish people, don't believe in the God of Israel, don't believe in Tanakh. We still consider them part of the Jewish community. And that's something we have to think about.
That's a very interesting point. I was just wanted to raise a concern about what happens when you go into YouTube and you get these Messianic videos with people that look, some of the Messianic Jews externally wear a kippah, wear tzitzit, and people click on them and they think they're watching Jewish content, and it isn't Jewish content. It's Christian content. It's Messianic.
It's a big problem.
Content. So briefly, if you can answer before we conclude.
Listen, it's a big problem, and a part of my work and other people like me who are out there in the Christian world, doing hasbara and building this relationship is actually to marginalize those forces. Because for a lot of mainstream Christians, they don't know Jews. And maybe the only Jews they know are, quote unquote, Messianic Jews. It could be that those are the only Jews they interact with. And they kind of look at them and say, oh, this is great. These are Jews who I can relate to. They also believe in Jesus, but they're Jewish. And they kind of seem like a bridge where they're the opposite of a bridge. So when I show up, if I go to a Christian college campus, I'm going to be visiting a few campuses in a few weeks from now, Christian seminary campuses where I'll be giving lectures and I'll be meeting with faculty and students, for example. Or when I go visit Christian communities in the U.S., I'm the worst enemy of the Messianics, because what I'm presenting is the authentic Judaism that undermines their claim to be Jewish. Right. And usually the people who are most upset about my presence there are Messianic Jews who see me as a threat to them.
Right, because
part of what we're trying to do is show Christians authentic Judaism.
Right, the source material better than they do when they quote Isaiah and the young maiden and all that stuff. Yeah.
I have to.
Of course. Okay, thank you very much to Rabbi Pesach Wolicki, the director of Israel 365 Action and co-host of Shoulder to Shoulder podcast. And thank you to our viewers. And don't forget to subscribe and like us on all our media channels. Shalom.